Hey y'all, it's Stephen Van Kampen-Lewis on Labor Day actually, which here in the United States, of course, is a Monday, and we have the day off. Most people have the day off, uh, so I figured I'd come out here in the morning while it's nice and cool. In fact, the sun is just coming up right now, and I want to show you um, not my garden, which actually looks pretty good considering it's like the hottest summer ever and a lot of people's gardens are dying. But I want to show you my orchids and how fried they are. The goal of today's discussion is not necessarily to be like a pity party, because what I want to do is show you and talk a little bit about how a combination of intense heat, intense sun, and dry air are sort of the trifecta of how to not grow orchids well. And then I'll talk about my plans to sort of alleviate, to fix, and to remedy the situation, both the burnt plants and for this year as well as preventing burning from next year. One of the things I'll do actually is put a greenhouse right here, hopefully in the next month or two. I've sent a request, an architectural committee request to our homeowners association, and I'm waiting for approval for that. And I'll show you some photos of the greenhouse that I'm planning to put up. Nothing fancy, actually. It's made by the same person who made my last greenhouse in Dripping Springs, which is just south of Austin. And instead of having a greenhouse that I take apart from someone else's house, the person who actually builds the greenhouse is going to come here and put it in. So I'm really excited for that, but I'll show you that in a sec. So let me turn the camera around, and you can see here. Oh, the sun's really getting bright. You can see here that the orchids are covered right now. So I'll uncover them and just kind of look at some of the ones that have done well actually, which is surprising, and then some of the ones that haven't done very well. I've actually lost a few plants, and it's been a couple of Catasetum types, and I think they had a problem during dormancy, and they just never woke up. So I don't know if it was necessarily the heat that did it so much as something that they didn't like, including a plant that William Green and I discussed. One of his plants was a division of one of his awarded plants. It's a Mormodia, and it just hasn't done well. And then you see his, and it's this big giant bush, and it looks great, and it's going to bloom. And anyway, let's get the camera turn around, look at some fried plants, talk about how I'm going to fix them, and then talk about the plans for the future so that they don't get fried again. So this is 40% shade cloth. Oh, I should say that this is facing west. So the sun behind me, of course, is rising from the east. It travels over top of the property. This is due north. My orchids are on this west wall so that they get that first shade at the first possible opportunity as the sun starts to get lower in the sky each evening. The shade kicks in, and I think that's helped. So what I'm going to do first of all is peel back some of these shade cloths and then show you some fried plants. So by the magic of television, you can see that the shade cloth has all been peeled back for the most part. But even from this far away, let's see if I can zoom in here, you can see the scorched Cattleya plant tips over there. Just hideous. So let's do that one last. And actually, let's start with this group. So you can see this group over here doesn't get any kind of shade cloth whatsoever. They're just out in the sun, and these are the super ultra highlight loving plants, specifically the Pseudopodiums and the Neobenthemia gracilis. Excuse me, it's Polystachya neobenthemia is the current name. It used to be Neobenthemia gracilis, and those get full sun, of course, about 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They get the shade from the the fence, and those are actually surprisingly fried. And then actually in front here, for all you flower lovers, this is my this is a native plant selection. I like to buy a bunch of plants during the summer when they're on sale, and then put them in the landscape when things cool down in fall, which here in Texas is when most people do their perennial planting. It's best to get them in around October. And of course this beauty is one of our native hibiscus. This is Hibiscus martianus, not an orchid, but still super cool and absolutely stunning, and I'm really excited to have this in my landscape. But that's not why we're here today. Well, let me get this. I also have a massive milkweed collection that is taking over my life with lots of aphids, but that's normal. Anyway, so you can see that even the pseudo-podiums are suffering there. This is normally a group that loves full sun and heat. And these are actually, this one's not looking too bad. This one is St. Ledrianum, and it's a little fried. As you can see, it's dropping some of its leaves a little prematurely. These are not doing too bad, but you can see some scorched leaf tips here, and these are some of the new growths, and these are actually not too bad. So for plants that are enduring months on end of 105 degrees with humidity down to 20% and full sun, they're doing pretty well, despite a few scorched leaf tips. But you know, it's a mixed bag. This level of burning is typically not seen on this group, and this Neobenthamia gracilis, this Polystachya, is actually starting to bloom. Normally it's got a head of flowers that would fit in my hand here like this. So it's certainly a reduced blooming, but it's still trying. And you can see how bleached these leaves are. It actually looks a little better since I've put it right up against the wall here. It was here next to some of these milkweeds, so it was a little higher up, and it was getting a little bit more sun. But now that I've dropped it down, it seems to be doing a little better. A little bit of the chlorophyll seems to be returning to some of these leaves. And even then, you can still, the higher up growths are still a little fried, but this one will recover just fine. This thing grows like a weed, as you can see down here. Just, you know, maybe a dozen new growths or more popping out, and then it just throws unending keikis. You can see up the canes, old ones and new ones, and they'll bloom. And it's a super cool plant, terrestrial. These all get, everything that you see here today, all my plants outside get hit with water every single day. So let's go over here. So this is a mixed group, and plenty of burnt leaves. Again, so these are my plants that are my largest plants. This is only 40% shade cloth. And so they're sort of enduring. This is my favorite Amethystic glossa. It's doing okay. You know, these leaves are toast, as you can see, but not all of them. It's got enough coming in that they'll be replaced. I've got some Catasetums hanging in the back. You can see a little bit of mite damage from earlier in the season before I nuked it. That's the classic mite damage, those sort of silver spots there. And then it hits the different plants differently. So, you know, these ones are unaffected. This little Walkeriana is doing great, although, you know, it's mounted, and it's been outside all summer. I'm surprised by how well it's doing. You know, whenever I have my Walkerianas in pots, they grow faster and they throw out more growth. So mounted works in our climate, but maybe not necessarily as within a pot. Not necessarily as well as within a pot. I think of this group, you know, the ones that got hit the most, this is actually grasshopper damage on my Peristeria alata. The leaves don't look terrible. They've got burnt tips where the where the leaves are hitting the shade cloth, and that's the same with these. So, and then you'll see, especially with the other Cattleyas down the line, it's right where the shade cloth touches the leaves on the top. That's the part that gets burnt the most. And for those of you that use shade cloth, you know that if you have shade cloth, you want to have it some distance from the plants. That sort of shade becomes more diffuse, whereas if you have your shade cloth right up against the plants, those little pinpricks of light are still very bright and still very damaging. And so that's why you get the burnt leaves, where these leaves are touching the shade cloth itself. But one that's done surprisingly well actually is this giant purpurata, the one that I highlighted some years ago as a Cattleya success story. It got root rot, went downhill really quickly, but it's just cranking out new growths. And these new growths are growing towards the sun rather than away. So some of the plants have their new growth growing away from the bright sun, and some towards. Some of my Cattleyas that are doing really well are purpuratas, and then some that are not doing well are also purpuratas. It's kind of a weird mixed bag. My Ancilla africana is doing nicely. Again, a burnt leaf tip right where it touches the shade cloth, but that's about it. This is Dendrobium speciosum that I got from Fred Clark a couple of years ago from his breeding. Doing okay. About to outgrow its pot. This pot is rock hard. It's just a brick of roots, and I need to repot this probably in the spring. Looks like I might have a sheath right there, so it would be cool if I get to see this one bloom. So these are not too bad despite only having 40% shade cloth. These are a little worse for the wear. These are my phals, as you can see, and I have added a second layer of shade cloth to the top of this, mostly to protect this Gigantea cross. This is Gigabel. This is Gigantea by Bellina, and is going to be really cool. It's starting to throw out a new spike there. Has some sun damage here, but it seems to have abated a bit. This one is Bisoniana, which used to be called Pulchra and just seems to be doing really well. Oddly enough, these get 50% shade. It's putting out a new spike here. You can see all the hard water buildup on these leaves from this, from the tap water here. In the next couple of years, my plan is to get rainwater catchment again, so I don't have that issue. It seems like my Tetraspis have really taken it on the chin. I'm not entirely sure if these will survive, but at this point, it's an experiment to see who survives. And I'm weird. I like to torture my plants in that way. This is also another Tetraspis, and it's really close to the fence. So it's getting shade early in the day and it's still getting fried, so I'm just going to let that one ride and see if it lives. Baby Nobilior is here. I've got another one of these pots inside. And then over here I have a bunch of Catasetum types. It's kind of a mixed bag. This one also had some mite damage early on, and you can see it's got sun stress. But the rest of them don't. So this particular one seems a little more sensitive to the heat and the sun, I guess. Where some of these other ones are doing just fine. I've got a bicolor that was trying to bloom for its first time, and now that I look at the buds close up, they're toast. They're about to fall off, but one of its siblings is throwing out its first bloom, so that's kind of cool. Here's that sad Mormodia that I got from William Green a year or so ago and just never woke up. Not really sure what's happening. This is an import Cycnices Cooperi that's doing okay. It's putting out new roots and still hasn't gotten a whole lot of water, but as you can imagine, I am watering occasionally, and then some larger Cattleyas that seem to be doing just fine. And for whatever reason, this is really the damage zone. So you can see these dead leaves. Most of the time, whenever these leaves die like this, I just pull them off or I cut them off, but they're providing shade for the plants underneath. So I'm leaving them. You can see they're just scorched. Some interesting patterns on some of these leaves. Maybe I should virus test this one, although I think I did and it came up negative. But then this is really the mess. I don't understand why this has taken it on the chin so badly. It doesn't get as much sun as the other places, but for some reason, every place where the leaves are touching the shade cloth, they're just getting fried, or where the leaf is directly exposed to the sun is just getting fried. And when I first saw this, there's some of you might be thinking, well, fertilizer burn kind of looks like that. And it does. But if it was fertilizer burn, I would see it on all the plants, especially the small ones, especially the little guys. They would be the first to burn. Whereas the shade cloth sitting right on top of this lets all of that nearly full sun hit these leaves, and they're just getting scorched. So that's where this is the state of the collection. It's doing okay. It's not doing terribly. It's not doing great. It's just sort of in stasis at this point, I guess. So I promised that I was going to have some solutions, and the current trajectory, I guess, for what I'm doing with my plants is nothing. There's nothing I can do. They are where they are. We're getting towards the end of the season where temperatures start to cool off. I should say we're getting towards the end of the hot season, but it's still pretty warm. And here in Texas, we're baking. Even the long time old timers are like, this is not normal. This is really hot for a couple of years, really. And of course, as we know, it's probably the new normal. So one of the reasons that I started this channel was to show people how they could grow orchids in very hot temperatures. And so I think a lot of the time I'm pushing sort of the upper temperature limit for a lot of these plants. And again, it's really that trifecta of high heat, high light, strong sunlight, and then low humidity. That's the sort of trifecta of danger. And if you can pull or remove one of those factors or reduce the extreme of one of those factors, elevate the humidity, increase the shade, increase air movement. Those are the types of things that you can do to help your plants along during this hot time of year. And then once you get up into that 105, 106, and then the humidity drops to 20% or so, it's just, there's not much you can do except bring your maybe temperature sensitive plants, your heat insensitive plants inside, provide better shade. I've mentioned if I had elevated the shade up off the plants, I don't think I would have seen nearly as much burning, but I had already spent money on shade cloth and devices, and I didn't want to go to my wife and say, hey, I need to spend a bunch more money. Especially, the new Sunset Valley orchids list dropped today for the Catasetum, the second one of this year, and I probably spent a little too much money on that. So let's not tell my wife. So those are some solutions. In the medium term, I'm not going to alter my fertilizer or my watering or anything, really. I'm just going to keep giving the care that I always do, and the plants will recover. And the ones that don't, oh well, too bad for you. That just makes more room for more plants. In a month or two, I should have a greenhouse here, and it'll be, if the HOA approves my request, it'll be 9 by 12, about 10 feet tall, and I'll show a photo here of what it's going to look like. And it's nothing fancy. It's going to be polycarbonate. It's not going to be twin wall. It will have a water wall, and it'll have a heater inside, of course, for our frigid nights that we get in January, February. So once that's up, that'll alleviate a lot of the problems I have. I'll have a better shade system. I will have, like I said, a water wall to keep those temperatures cooler. My plan is to have 95 degrees in that greenhouse, so that'll help me save on energy costs, as well as water. Having a water wall to cool everything requires plenty of water. So to be more efficient, I'm going to keep my temperatures at 95. You know, I've shown that the plants can do just fine with 105 to a certain extent, as I've been growing in Texas and showing all of you for years and years on YouTube. If you have that right system of humidity, shade. My previous place had a lot of shade, and I was able to grow under the shade of the oak trees in the late afternoon, which really saved a lot of my plants, but I would still get sunburn, especially as the sun was tracking across the sky, and maybe a hole in the oak trees opened up, and it allowed the sun to come right through, and that helped fry some of the plants occasionally. But with a new greenhouse right here, I'll have the shade, I'll have the humidity, and I'll have the temperature down to 95, which is just fine for the plants that I grow, the heat-loving, heat-tolerant plants that I grow. So those are my solutions. Those are my problems. My solution hopefully will be over here, and once that's up, I look forward to showing all of you the build process and then the growing in a greenhouse, in a more permanent greenhouse that's closer to my house. My one in Dripping Springs was all the way across the yard, and it didn't have, I had to run a cord for any kind of heat and use propane, and it wasn't a great system. This is going to be a much nicer system, and I look forward to showing you lots of videos in the future. Anyway, have a great weekend. Bye.